Hi, I'm Sarah Veblen. I teach sewing and fitting, anything to do with garment making. And today I am going to be giving a presentation about gaping front necklines. And I will be explaining what they are. Sometimes it's over here in the side, but sometimes it's just loose fabric right there in the middle, and you feel like you want to take some out right down center front. My presentation has 5 different sections. I'll be talking about identifying a gaping front neckline, fixes for that, the gaping front neckline, the pattern work that's involved with that. What do you do when you have a lower neckline? Because that often will cause gaping front necklines. And then what the difference between just sort of normal everyday gaping front necklines, which usually means that we're narrow here in the front, and what a hollow chest is, and some things that you can do to help fit a hollow chest. So we'll get started. I'll share my screen here. And just so you see, here are those different items that I'll be talking about, or topics that I'll be talking about today. To get started on our first one, to identify a gaping front neckline, I have some pictures from the internet. Most of these are from Pinterest, and some of them are my students as well, but some are just stock pictures from Pinterest or things that people have posted. So here you can see a really good example of a gaping front neckline. Here also, you can see the gaping front neckline that is right here in the middle. Now, there are other things going on in this. Her armholes need to be clipped, but this is the issue that I want you to be able to look at and identify. Here is a picture from the internet or Pinterest, and you can see somebody is pointing out how big the neckline is there. It looks like the fit in the bust is okay. The armhole's a little big, but there's really significant gaping in the front neckline. Here is somebody else with a really large issue of gaping front neckline. There are a whole bunch of things going on in this fitting muslin, but the gaping front neckline is certainly something that needs to be addressed. Here is another picture of it. This gal is a student of mine. She happens to have a hollow chest as well, so I'll be talking about that. Here is another student of mine. I've taken her photo that she had submitted to me for help on fitting, and I've just sort of shadowed in these areas. But you can see this fabric is coming up here and here. It's sagging down in here. We have almost a vertical fold and a vertical fold here. These are more horizontal droop lines. And here is a picture from the internet showing that gaping front neckline. Everything else looks like it's fitting pretty well, but the issue with gaping front neckline, a lot of people want to pin this, but you can't pin out a wedge at center front. One of the few rules of pattern making is that center front is a straight line. So you don't want to have a wedge in there, unless sometimes in dresses, special occasion work especially, you'll actually have a curved front seam line. But in general, we want the center front to be able to be on the fold or to have it straight. So those are really good pictures of how to identify the issue of a gaping front neckline. So sometimes it's on the side, as I said. Often what you feel like is it's right here in the front, and that you could pin out something to a little bit higher up. Sorry about that. So we'll keep going on to our next section. I know this picture is a little small, but I'll bring it up in size. It'll get a little pixelated, but we'll keep going. You can see here that somebody has a picture has illustrated an instance of a gaping front neckline, and it shows right in here. Sometimes you are lucky and you're able to just pick that shoulder up. So you are increasing the shoulder seam in the front here. The back probably is staying the same. You're doing it more at the neckline than at the armhole, perhaps nothing at the armhole. And occasionally this does work, but I will tell you that very often it doesn't. And that's just, we have to experiment with things. You can make little darts or pleats, and that is an effective way to take up some excess in the front neckline. If you are in your fashion fabric already and have not addressed it in a mock-up of fitting muslin, and so you could just make some little darts. You could do them as little tucks. But at any rate, what you're doing is you're getting rid of the fullness here at the neckline, and it extends down as far as it needs to, but then the rest of the garment is unaffected. Here's a picture of somebody who has taken out, pinned out what I refer to as a closed wedge. So she's taken out a bunch at the neckline, going to 0 here. If you have a waist seam, you could possibly do that all the way down and reestablish a front. You could put a center front seam in. But again, these are kind of, these are fixes that are not, to me, really addressing the issue. So one thing that is often suggested is the fix, and I agree it is a good way to do this, but not the only way, is to make a close wedge here in the neckline. You can see you're keeping center front nice and straight. You're taking up the excess here, pin it out to the apex, and then rotate it into the side bust dart. And there are times that this works, but I will show you my method, which involves me checking for things, checking to make sure that the bust is fitting pretty well, because what I don't want to do is just willy-nilly pin this out, rotate it into the side bust dart, and then discover that my side bust dart is really directing too much fullness for the bust. But this is something that it works effectively a good deal of the time. But you'll see in my process, I'm going to be checking for some other things along the way. So here is my method. Here you can see a muslin on my dress form where there is this loose fabric here along the neckline. Everything else works pretty well. I use horizontal balance lines. That's in my Complete Guide to Photo Fitting book, and in First Time Fitting, I've written threads articles about it. I talk about it in many, many instances. And the horizontal balance line helps me read the fabric. You can see I have a pretty good amount of bust shaping in here, or when I say good amount, an appropriate amount. I've got a little vertical fold here and here, which could be taken care of with fisheye darts or with a waist dart. The fit through the shoulder looks pretty good, but there's this loose fabric right in here. So one thing that is really important to me is to assess that my dart intake is correct. And I can tell that the dart intake is correct because my horizontal balance line is level. Now, if that horizontal balance line is level here, 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 and then it starts to dip down, that tells me that I need more side bust dart intake in order to get my HBL level. And whatever that additional intake is, you would take in an even tuck, the same amount all the way across the back of the garment at about bust level. So you would increase the bust dart, do a tuck. Tuck wedge combination is very common, But in this case, one thing that I want to take note of in my approach is that the HBL is level. So that tells me that my bust shaping, the amount of three-dimensionality I'm directing towards the bust is correct. Here you can see the HBLs, how level they are going across from the front of the garment, going to the back of the garment. This is my standard blouse pattern. I like it relatively loose, which you can see here. And here is the HBL. Again, you can just see that it's nice and level going across here. That's the back. And here is the upper part. The fit is quite nice. I've got some neck darts to accommodate the amount my shoulder blades protrude and then drop down. I'll go back to here. This is the lower part of the back. And you can see I just like some fullness in my blouse in here. I don't like it terribly fitted. The shoulder fits pretty well. I don't have any gaping in the back of the neck. The front of the neck here is laying flat, but you can see that gaping is here. The shoulder seam is following the shoulder of the body, or in this case, my dress form, which is a ditto form, a replica of me that's pretty darn close. So what I like to do is I will pin the back of the garment to my bra strap. And then I will release the seam of the shoulder. I'll take the stitches out there. You can see that I've cut them. So on both, here is the left side of the body, on the right side as well. I would pin the garment to the bra strap and then take these seams out. And in fact, you can do this on yourself. If you're fitting yourself, you can reach around and pin the mock-up to your bra strap back. Here, it's really just at the top of the shoulder, or you could get somebody to help you do that here and here. And it's a little awkward to reach up there, but you want that garment laying nice and flat. But then you want to get the garment stabilized so it doesn't drop down and move away from the body. That's why you're pinning it to your bra strap here. If you don't wear a bra, you could have a camisole on or something like that and pin the back of the garment to your camisole strap or the camisole. Take these stitches out. I often say release those stitches. And then you are going to smooth the fabric out. Watching center front, you want to keep center front where it is, and you're going to smooth this shoulder out this way, and you're going to smooth this shoulder out this way. So the back is stable, it's staying where it is, and you're smoothing that out in either direction. And you can see as you do that, you're going to get your back shoulder seam at the neckline will start to show here because you're moving this fabric out that direction and this fabric out that direction. Just keep a really good eye on your center front to keep it in the middle. You don't want to pull too much to one side and have that get torqued over to the side. And there I continued to do that, and you can see that the fabric is laying nice and smooth. Now there's a little bit of slumping in here, but this will go away eventually through the course of the fitting. And some of this is actually a pin. These are pin drag lines. They are not really drag lines. I don't like a tight fit across here. I like the fabric to bridge across my breast without being taut really, really tight. So you can see there's a little bit of ease in here from apex to apex, but you can see now I do not have any of that gaping in the front neckline. Center front is right along the front, and I've moved those out to either side. Then I will pin the front shoulder to the back shoulder, and then I will mark the new armhole. We've moved this front fabric out this way. So that means that there is excess fabric here at the armhole. So I would mark that. Here I've marked it in a row of pins, and then you can transfer that to your pattern, and literally you will just cut it off. You don't need to rotate anything. You're literally just going to cut this off. You also will fill in the front neckline. Remember that slid this direction. That means that this armhole area is projecting out beyond the back armhole, and there was this gaping here in the front of the neckline, and you will fill that in, blending down to a nice curve for your neckline. And then in the pattern work, you literally, on the front pattern, you'll just add some paper and fill that in, just as I did here on the fitting muslin. So then let's look at these pattern changes. It's pretty straightforward, but I like to show the pattern work. So here is our starting place. This is in half scale, so it shows on my grid board better than if we did it in full scale. But here is my center front. I have moved it this direction in relation to the back shoulder seam. So the front is here. I've moved it out this way. Now I have some excess fabric showing here at the armhole, and I need to fill in here, just like I explained on the dress form in the fitting muslin. So then I draw in a nice armhole, blending to nothing where it makes sense. Sometimes that might be just a little smidge lower. It's getting down near the front crease of the arm, right down through here. And then I'm going to fill in here. So we do this, and then I usually would make another mock-up. And what I'm saying here is, if this adjustment puts some gaping into the front armhole, then what you are going to be doing is pinning that out in your muslin. Don't get that area too tight, but pin that out, having it pointing either to the dart point or to the bust point. And then you will rotate that into the side bust dart. You could also rotate your side bust dart up into and have an arm side dart, which is what I prefer. But in this case, if we want to keep that side bust dart, we'll pin out the gaping in the armhole. As I said, do not get this area too tight. You won't be comfortable, especially when you try to get a sleeve in there, and then rotate that in. And so that's what that would look like. So you've just rotated, closed this dart up, and opened this. What you do is you cut along one or the other of these dart legs of the arm side dart that you pinned in, then match those, line those up. And now we'll blend this armhole area just right in there, make that a nice smooth curve. So this last example, that if you move these shoulder seams out and you get the gaping in the front armhole, then you'll pin that out and then you rotate it into the side bust dart. In essence, what you have done is you've just rotated that excess here at the neckline up and around and here. So in that particular case, if you do what I do, smooth out here, then check to see if you have gaping in the front armhole. If you do, you rotate it into your side bust dart, or create a side bust dart if you don't have one. That tells me that really in the beginning, I could have pinched out a dart here going to the apex and rotated it. But the reason I don't jump to do that is that sometimes when I smooth out to the side, I do not get any gaping in that front armhole. And what I want to do is make sure that I don't put too much fabric into the front side bust dart. I don't want to get that too big and then have that issue. So that's again why I prefer to move the shoulder seam, the front shoulder seam out relative to the back shoulder seam. Then assess what is going on in the armhole. And if I have gaping, I will take that out. That way I have a lot more control about how that front armhole looks. And if there is no gaping there, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to pin out anything in the front armhole and rotate into the side bust dart. So I really warn people, caution people against getting too much three-dimensionality put into that side bust dart. So where it might be tempting to say, okay, I'm just going to pinch this out and rotate it. Certainly you can do that if you are starting out in your HBLs are not level, then you might want to go that direction. But I much prefer to take this step by step by step. So I see each step along the way what is going on in my mock-up and how my fit is. And so then here we'll finish up and talk about low necklines. So when you get a low neckline, and here's an example of a neckline. Do you see the gaping starting right in here and here? This picture is pixelated because it was from the internet and it was small and I blew it up. But you can see that gaping here and here. And that's because the neckline is crossing the breast tissue in here. So that is the reason that you are getting the gaping, because the neckline is crossing the breast tissue. What you would do is pin out a small dart. Again, don't get that tight, especially if it's the cut edge of the fabric, which might have stretched. Pin that out, having it go towards the apex, and then rotate it into your side bust dart. And the reason that's happening is because the neckline is crossing breast tissue. Here is an example of gaping in a front neckline that is a V-neck. This was from Pinterest. Again, what I would do is pin this out on each side, the same amount on each side, pointing towards the apex, and then rotate that, either creating a side bust dart if there is not one, or adding it to the existing side bust dart. And again, this is happening because of the lowness of the V. A lot of people think, well, the breast tissue is really out here, but if I feel my body, my breast tissue is all the way up into here. It's not just down here at the full part of the bust. That breast tissue comes up much higher. And that's what I'm talking about, is when the neckline crosses any of this roundness of the breast tissue. You want to check to see if you're getting gaping, and then pin out a dart, and then you would rotate that into your side bust dart. And it almost always works quite perfectly. So here you can see the gaping in this neckline. Again, it's because this neckline is low and it's crossing over the breast tissue. Here is somebody else where this gaping, there's some other fitting issues going on, but she has gaping on both sides. I would pinch that out and rotate it. It's because that neckline is low enough that it's crossing actual breast tissue right in this area. Here's a picture from the internet, the same type of thing. If you imagine, I fit enough that I can usually picture these things. If you pinned out a little dart here and here, you do the same on both sides. It's going to make that fabric then conform back down over the top of the bust so that you don't get that gaping. And then you would want to smooth out in your pattern work, smooth out your neckline. Every once in a while, when I have gaping in the front neckline, I'm able to play around with where I pin it out and I'll try pinning it out here every once in a while. I'm able to pin it out higher with a close wedge that goes to 0 at the armhole seam. And in that case, you don't need to rotate anything into the side bust dart. So sometimes this works, but sometimes it makes the fabric over the bust fit too snugly. So this is certainly something that you can try pinning out here. Could be anywhere across from the armhole, going to 0 at the armhole. But you want to be checking how everything else is fitting too. And if it doesn't fit, especially if it makes the fit over the bust too snug, then you'll want to do a pin out your gaping with a close wedge or dart that's pointed towards the apex and rotate it into your side bust dart. So here is just another picture of this where you are pinning this out. You could actually make a little tuck if you wanted. Because you have a princess seam here, you can pin this out going to nothing at your princess seam, and then you can simply close up the pattern of your the front. So you won't end up increasing the fit, the three-dimensionality for the bust here. You would just draw in your close wedge here and then close it. That's going to bring that shoulder seam up in terms of the pattern, what is going to happen to the pattern. So because center front stays the same, you close that close wedge, it's going to move the pattern this way. It'll make that neckline smaller, but what you've done is, because you have a seam opposite of where the gaping is, you can just close it out in what I refer to as a close wedge. So this again, we've seen this once before. So what we're talking about is making a close wedge at the neckline and rotating it into the side bust dart. But I've already explained why I don't jump to do this, that I first want to check that if I do that slide of the front neckline out this way, if I don't have gaping in that front armhole, then I don't automatically want to rotate the gaping into the neckline gaping into a side bust dart. So I have just one more section about hollow chests, which can be pretty difficult to fit. The first thing we want to do is talk about what it is. This is a picture from a medical website on the website and on the internet, and this really is a hollow chest. This is depicting a hollow chest quite low. Often, especially in my experience on women, the hollow chest is often a little bit higher. And here is, oops, that certainly didn't do what I wanted it to do. Here you can see this gal, this student of mine, her chest is hollow in here. So she's got this gaping here that I could take out via darts or shift those shoulders, which is what we ended up doing on her. But when you have a hollow chest, you often have a length issue as well. So what I would do is pin the back of the garment to the bra straps, release the seam, take the stitching out here, and I would smooth this up, and then I would smooth the shoulder seams over. And then once the front was laying flat with center front nice and flat and center front at center front, I would lap the back shoulder seams on top of what I've done, and then I would be able to tell what the change was. So you'd be shortening the front and the shoulder seam as well as sliding it out. And that's because of the hollow chest. We have too much length here as well as too much width here. So up and then over. Here is a picture of the same gal that where she's wearing her bra and a top, so you can start to see better how hollow she is right in here. For a hollow chest, I like to have the fabric bridge between the bust. And then I want the fabric to be as smooth as possible coming up. That's that length. And really what we're doing is having the fabric bridge all the way across in this area. The hollow is in here. They're between sort of the skin and musculature over the bust line here and here. So the fabric in one sense is floating in this area as well as floating here. So it's floating from the shoulder. It may be touching a little bit here, but floating down to the bust. And then it's floating from the collarbone or upper chest in here down. So I don't like to let the fabric contour between the bust at all when I have a hollow chest, because I think it makes it's a more flattering proportion for someone with a hollow chest to have that out flat. So they look more solid in there and you don't see that hollow chest. For most gals with a hollow chest, you probably aren't going to want a very low neckline either. So one fix that you can do for any sort of gaping in the front neckline, but also a hollow chest. Here you can see the fabric is contouring down between the breasts a little bit, but with this gaping here, you could just pin out some little tucks, and you could sew them either to the outside. You could have little tiny pin tucks, a whole lot of them, or these, you could do it in the 3 here and then press them to one side. You could bring it to the inside. You could have it go further down to a dart. But that's one way to go about doing it, especially if you're already in a fabric, fashion fabric that you want to save the garment. Here, there's some fitting issues going on, but what I really want you to be concentrating on is that the fabric is, in fact, this person is letting the fabric contour just a little bit between the bust, and here's the hollow chest area, but this part of the chest is nice and flat. It's protruding enough that then you could fit along it. So I hope that these different thoughts about how to go about fixing a gaping neckline are helpful to you. I decided to do a free video on this because I'm so often asked about how I go about taking care of that gaping. And I had never seen in a fitting book anything about fixing the back shoulder to the bra strap and moving this out. But once I started to do that, I realized how extremely useful it is. And as I say, then secondarily, if I'm having issues in the front armhole, I can always pin the dart out. But very often it just takes care of itself just like that. And there's to me, it's much more straightforward. You can see the gaping here. You're going to smooth that out and then again assess about that front armhole. So I encourage you to, if you have gaping in your front neckline, to at least experiment with this a little bit. Take another half hour or so, 20 or 30 minutes, and see how it works for you. And if it does, I'm really glad that my thoughts have helped you. And I look forward to having more information about different fitting issues available to you on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, and I appreciate you following my work. Bye-bye.